So, today I would like to tell you a story, the story of a prince who fights a war against a powerful king. He's defeated, but honorably defeated, and it is a story that takes place during the Middle Ages. Okay, why do I want to tell you this story? Because I would like to think a little bit with you about what do we think about the Middle Ages and why we tend to think of Middle Ages in a certain way and a certain way which implies certain things that the Middle Ages were a dark age, that were a barbarian age with superstition and religion and miracles and burning witches and all these kind of things, and a vision that we have today. We still, the Middle Ages are very popular in fiction. You know that as well as I do from Dungeons and Dragons and the trilogy of the Ring and many things that we tend to see in our fictional space. And what I will specifically tell you, this specific story is one story written by an Italian writer who was Alessandro Manzoni, whom you probably heard about for having written the story, the novel that in English is The Betrothed and in Italian is I Promessi Sposi, The Betrothed. And this is Manzoni. Let me show you his face. He wrote in early 19th century, and he wrote not just the novel that he's known for, but a theatrical piece titled Adelchi. Adelchi, which I think can tell us a lot. You never heard of this story, probably, if you're not Italian. If you are Italian, you probably had to study it in high school, but if you're not Italian, you probably didn't know that he wrote a medieval story in the form of a play. It was not a novel. And I think there are so many interesting elements in the way Manzoni wrote this story that it is worth returning to it and explaining the story. But let me first tell you how I got into this idea of telling you this story. How was that? Let me show you. I was walking maybe a couple of weeks ago nearby, near my home, and I found a box near a supermarket, something like that, where people drop their books because nobody reads books anymore. As you know, books are now have mainly zero value, zero monetary value. You find books distributed for free. And I still read books. I don't know about you, but I still like. You can see a little bit that I, I haven't quit reading books yet. But still, you find low quality books in a box left in the street, of course. And I found this book. This is in Italian, but it is a translation of a book, an American book written in English. You can probably read the title in Italian is Cristallo Verde. In English was the Green Crystal. The Green Crystal was written by someone who signs Amanda Quick. I had no idea who she was. You probably have no idea who she is. But then, after reading the story, the novel, I went to look for her, and she's a professional writer who writes this kind of romantic novels, not very commercial stories that people once would write this kind of story that would sell and you would make a living out of writing novels. This is not possible anymore, but things do change. So the thing is that this is clearly a medievally story, a sort of medieval atmosphere. Even the front cover here of the Italian edition is it's shamelessly copying a painting by the Pre-Raphaelites, British Pre-Raphaelites, but never mind that. And it's a very, very nice novel, by the way. Fantastic. I loved it. Commercial, not a masterpiece, whatever you want, but very nice. This lady, this quick, she knows how to entertain a reader. It's important. It's so you have this story, delightful characters, like this young lady of the novel who's named Alice, and she's poor, a little poor, not so poor, but not rich enough that she can pay the dowry for marrying a rich man. So she thinks, well, better for me to become a nun. But she plays a little her cards, pretending that she's a witch and she can cure people with crystals and things like that. She's smart. She's um, ironic, essentially. And then she finds a knight, dark knight, who turns out to be a good guy. And then they find and agree, they find each other. They like each other, and it doesn't start in romantic terms. They like each other. The knight gives her the castle to manage. He hires her. Okay, so you manage the castle for me while I'm not at home. Please do it as if you were me. Do it well. Okay, I'll do it. And then lots of things happen. She lets the army of the castle against an enemy. She wins the battle, and then the knight comes back and says, well, who told you to go to war? Oh, well, you told me that I should do as if I were you. Okay, good. So fine. And then eventually they fall in love with each other and they marry. But anyway, the point is not this. This is a nice novel, but the question is why? Why does such a thing exist? Think of this from the viewpoint of somebody from the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages was a time when books already existed. They were called codexes. But it would have been strange that that you would entertain yourself by looking at very small signs on a blank page. It's a novel. Imagine you are a bard in the sense of somebody who tells story, a professional. Imagine that and say you can read, you read and you can. I mean, telling a story is completely different than reading a story. Reading is flat. It's always flat. That's it's we have to the reader has to do a big effort to put life into something that is not alive. Written words are not the same as spoken words. I could translate for you. This is in Italian. I can read it in a mechanical tone. It doesn't matter. I'm sure everything will go well. Besides, there are too many stories which need my attention so that I could look for another girl to marry. That's if you it's the text. Now that you read it with a tone with an emphasis. No, it doesn't matter. I'm sure everything will go well. That's too many things to do. I can't take time to look for another girl. It is very different, but you have to be able to read it and to imagine. To, it's like when you play music. You play music, but the music shit it doesn't sound. It makes no sound. That's and so that's a strange thing of the novel. The novel has been a very special thing in the late 19th century, from the 19th century to the first half of the 20th century. And I sort basically disappeared because it is difficult. You need to be trained to be able to read a novel. Instead, you don't have to be trained to hear a story. And there's this here that I think that Manzoni, with this story that he wrote in 1822, he was very modern. I think he was already thinking, well, I can write, he would say, I can write a novel, and he did. He wrote a masterpiece. But it's more interesting to write something than somebody will recite for you, will tell you. A play is not supposed to be read. A play is supposed to be played. You have a stage, you have actors, you have a public, and you have the scene moving on. Like in our movies, we have possibilities that, of course, at the time of Manzoni was not even thinkable. But this is one point which makes Manzoni very modern. The other point is the interest in the Middle Ages. Middle Ages, Middle Ages, Middle Ages. But why Middle Ages? What are exactly these Middle Ages? And this is long story, because we're talking Middle Ages are 1,000 years. 1,000 years starting with the fall of the Roman Empire at 472, if I remember correctly, of our age, and then they end with Columbus discovering America, usually, which is a conventional breakpoint. Imagine you are in Europe in 1492 and somebody tells you, oh, look, the Middle Ages are over. Wow, what? Nobody knew that such a thing as the Middle Ages existed in the 15th century. And then at some moment people start thinking about the Middle Ages, and early in the modern times, people start thinking that the Middle Ages are a barbarian age, are an age of darkness. But maybe it's some good reasons, because it was a time very different from the Roman period, which came before, and from our modern period. I think just one thing. During the early Middle Ages, it is estimated that in Europe there were about 18 million people. 18 million people. Can you believe that? Today, Europe is 350 million, Western Europe. 350 million people. Unbelievable. What was the Middle Ages? Nobody around. You had castles on top of mountains or hills. Kings, knights, nuns, priests, monks, but it was very different, very different. And the Middle Age people, they had to do things with very little. They had to keep together a civilization, this civilization that the Romans had built, to keep it despite the lack of people, lack of money, lack of resources. And they managed some interesting things. And with the age that we call the Enlightenment, people started thinking that they were way superior to their ancestors of the Middle Ages. You think of Edward Gibbon, who wrote Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And it is very clear in that book, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, that it is a fall. Going from the empire to the Middle Ages for Gibbon, it's not an improvement by no means. It's a disaster. It's the victory of superstition over rationality. So, Dark Ages. But things were not so simple. And then about the time of Gibbon, not much later, people start rethinking at the Middle Ages. Yeah, maybe Dark Ages, but fascinating. And then you have a stream of fiction that starts with the late 18th century, early 19th century, a stream of fiction about the Middle Ages. Sir Walter Scott, the stories, the Scottish writer, Ivanhoe, this kind of things, or Horace Walpole, who wrote The Castle of Otranto. That's another Gothic fiction. We start because fiction is fundamental. None of us ever lived in the Middle Ages. There's no one who lived during the Middle Ages. So we have to filter what we know through an emotional, some kind of fictional idea, to figure out in our mind what living during the Middle Ages could have been. And this is what this lady does, with I would say, not so unsuccessfully, but clearly the Middle Ages of this book is not very much like the real thing could have been, and just like not Tolkien with the Trilogy of the Ring, or not Dungeons and Dragons, or things like that. It's Middle Ages, because there were no dragons, no real wizards, no magic spells that actually worked in the way our fiction imagines them to work. And that's And that's a fundamental point. I think the Middle Ages are represented in such fantastic, such strange way because we don't. It's very difficult for us to understand what the Middle Ages were. Mm. But I think somebody succeeded. You understand where I want to go? Back to Manzoni and to Adelchi, because I think that this play, Adelchi, is extremely modern. It's not something old and dusty as it appeared to us, as also to me. I studied it in school. Seems to be very dusty, boring. What the hell is this? But now I can see that it is something telling us something of the future. Because the way it is written, because what it tells to us. Let me tell you a little about this story, because you probably never heard of it, but it deals with a dark age, not so dark, but anyway, the Roman Empire falls, there are wars, the Greeks conquer Italy, then the Goths conquer Italy, then the Greeks reconquer back Italy, then at some moment in an Italy which was completely devastated by wars, there comes people from the north, Germanic people, whom we call sometimes Lombards or sometimes Longobards. Longobards are quotes, barbarians, in the sense they were not Latins. The word Lombards means long birds, probably, or perhaps long halberds. We don't know. Anyway, they conquer Italy and they establish themselves in Italy. Kingdom of the Lombards in Italy. North of the Alps, there are another Germanic people, which are the Franks, the ancestor of the modern French. And at some moment, when this story takes place, we are in the late 8th century AD. We have a political situation which is very clearly explained by Manzoni in this play, because Manzoni, first of all, he was a historian. He knew what he was talking about. He was a professional historian. So it tells us this story of the geopolitics of balance between the Franks on one side and the Lombards on the other. They were fighting, or in any way competing in order to dominate Europe, with, in addition, the presence of the Pope in Rome. The Pope had spiritual and cultural importance, because the church was the direct heir of the Roman Empire, and it had this specific power that they had Latin as a means of communication. Because one problem with this book, with everything that happens in the fiction, of everybody speaks the same language. Charlemagne here meets King Desiderius of the Lombard, and they speak to each other in Italian. But probably at the time, they would not have understood each other about different languages. And then Latin, the thing that the church could manage, Latin, you could use it to understand each other. You were Frank and you could not speak Lombard, but if you could find a Lombard who would speak Latin and you could speak Latin, or you find somebody who speaks Latin, then you could interact using Latin as a lingua franca, something that many people understood. And that was the importance of the Pope, not so much that because of religion, because they had this tool of communication, for good or for bad, unified Europe. And that's also, this is not so clear here, but clearly the conflict is very well outlined. And then there is the environment, the scenery of this story, which is absolutely fantastic. I don't know how Manzoni managed to manage to tell you this story, because you really feel that the story happens in a place, in an Italy which is empty. There's now very few people, and savage Italy, made of ruins, forests, mountains, rivers, and True that the armies of the Lombards, the armies of the Franks, the people sending messages they go through, but the passage, yeah, they move in an almost empty space. There is a scenery which is fantastic of a monk which is sent by the Pope to help Charlemagne, who is trying to invade Italy, but he cannot because he's blocked at the Alps by the Lombard army. And so this monk goes across the mountains to find a path for Charlemagne's army to go through. And there's this description is truly fantastic. And this monk goes to a world completely empty of people, mountains, river, forests, pines, kind of things. And see, that's the way you tell a story. And also, when there are scenes of battle on how we can do it in our times by showing the battles on the screen when there is a movie made in Hollywood or wherever. But it's difficult when you write a novel. It's difficult to describe a battle because it is flat. You say the army, this he goes, he rose, he took his sword and he rose it, raised it over his head and he screamed, "To me, people," etc. And Manzoni, who had in mind the Greek tragedy, he gives as a chorus telling us the story. And it's very deep. It is very close to the ancient way of telling stories. When you would tell stories by using the rhythm, the cadence, the movement, the tone of the voice to tell a story, to affect your listeners. You don't have an image. You are a bard, like I'm Ugo Bardi, but not a bard. But you cannot show people you're telling a story to. You cannot show them a battle, but you can make them feel a battle. And I could translate it for you, but you would lose the cadence, the rhythm, the music. Just let me read it for you, a few lines in Italian, and you just listen to the rhythm and see what you think. This is what is telling here is at this point the Lombards have been defeated, and the Lombards were the masters of Italy. And he shows us, Manzoni, the Italians coming out of their huts, of their dwellings, and seeing their former masters running away, followed by the winners, the Franks. And the story is all about the cadence. Let me read it for you in Italian. Dagli atri muscosi, dai fori cadenti, dai boschi, dall'arse fucine stridenti, dai solchi bagnati di servo sudor. Un volgo disperso repente si desta, intende l'orecchio, solleva la testa, percosso da nuovo crescente rumor. Dai guardi dubbiosi, dai pavidi volti, quel raggio di sole da nuvoli folti traduce dei padri la fiera virtù. I'm sorry to have inflicted you this Italian, but I think if you don't understand Italian, you can feel the rhythm. It takes you. You cannot avoid it. Yeah, we are spoiled because we don't see on scene a million orcs fighting the warriors of the Roy Rim or whoever they are, but think that really all what you feel about something that goes inside your mind. So what I wanted to tell you is not so much about Manzoni or this specific story, but I wanted to tell you about communication, about telling stories, because communication is very much about telling stories, and we have been telling stories to each other for 100,000 years, and we do. And the question is, how will we be telling stories in the future? For a certain period in our recent history, we have been telling stories using this curious object, a book, which is now completely obsolete. Everything is changed, but the human mind has not changed. And the basics of the human mind remains the same. So I'm sure that we will be telling each other stories again. And history goes in cycles. Just like the Roman Empire disappeared, the Middle Ages came, the modern ages came, and so the way of telling story changed, but eventually it is a cycle where things change but also remain the same. And I think that Manzoni has been telling us almost exactly 200 years ago, has been telling us how we may be telling us stories in the near future, going back to using that wonderful instrument which is the human voice in order to transmit sensations, feelings, and ideas from and to each other. And maybe we will also rediscover the Middle Ages, which, let me repeat that, they never were a dark age. They were a wonderful age full of light, and they can tell us a lot about what our future could be if we are willing to look and listen to what the ancient can still tell us. And thank you very much for your attention.